23rd day of August. This is a day history we'll remember. We're going to tell this story just for posterity's sakes. We can't do anything about it. The most terrible story, unfortunately, the nuclear industry must be celebrating tonight. There's parties everywhere to celebrate the fact that they got away with the biggest crime history will ever have, the extinction of the majority of the species and the decimation of humanity. And they done it for a paycheck on top of that. There's no great cause, there was no noble gold or anything. It was contempt and hatred, and arrogance and hubris. That's their driving forces. They're missing those chromosomes. They don't have empathy. They don't covet life like me and you. Everybody should hang their heads in silence. Everybody should reflect. In fact, go out and find birds and enjoy it. Get pictures to prove they actually existed, because in a few years, not a decade, but in a few years, those pictures will be worth a lot of money. You see nothing but emaciated whales and seals and sea lions. It's not climate change. This is 80 years of radioactive emissions into your environment. They know what they were doing the entire time, right from the inception, right from the 40s. There was no illusions. There was no illusions what they were doing, which is, I find, to be frightening. And so there's not a single other entity on the entire planet providing the documentations of the Fukushima tanks, for instance. How that's a big... I'm going to bore you again tonight with it, but there was 1,000 tanks, they said. They built them all, by the way, in 2013. And that's going to hold all the water they're pouring on multiple nuclear meltdowns and fuel pools that melted down for 12 years in 1,000 lousy tanks. And a typical reactor could fill up all the tanks, just a single reactor, 6 times a day. Not 12 years, but 6 times a day to keep them cool. I know they're not out there laughing, they're not out there celebrating in just droves everywhere worldwide. This is a big moment. It's a huge moment in history. There's nothing to be proud of, unless you're exceptionally evil, and that's applicable. It seems, and it's hard to say it's not true, when you look at the entire nuclear industry and you see that symmetrically. It's the one thing that was in common was this contempt for everything, including themselves and their loved ones, and the ones who were foolish enough to admire them. And 80 years of telling the same lies and come to fruition now, hasn't it? The media worldwide has participated as a willingly partner in this massive crime against the species and humanity and the future of humanity. And the only little speck we have in the entire solar system we can call habitable. They've wrecked that. And they've done it on 100% intentionally. And they've done it administration after administration after administration. They went and got incredible educations to get that job to destroy your future. And they live in this invisible world where there's no accountability. The more evil you are, the bigger the paycheck and the quicker the rise to power. There's no secret codes or secret handshakes, or every university knows why you're there. Nobody's going to call you on it. Nobody's going to question you on being evil and genocidal and omnicidal. Nobody. There's nobody. No government agencies. There's no investigative journalism. There's no police departments. There's no courts of laws. There's no incentive not to be as evil as you want. There's no limit. It's encouraged. You're a winner, and they'll celebrate you. They'll give you awards. You get the Nobel Prize. There's tons of banquets, tons of small awards. We'll have big galas and tuxedos and cocktails. So you can play your little part in the destruction of your own future and everybody else's for a paycheck. And you knew the job existed because your parents came from the same cloth, right? And their parents and their parents, and 80 years of the inbreeding. And you don't have any concept of what the human experience is all about. Or maybe you do, and that's why you're like you are. A contempt. Which serial killer would you rather have? The one with a knife in front of you, or the one with a pen that destroys 1 billion people with a stroke of it? And is too coward to confront a bully during school. They were too much of a coward to defend the honor of their partner or their girlfriend their whole life. They weren't too much of a coward with a stroke of a pen to destroy everybody's future and know what they were doing. They went and got the education just to get that job because they knew the job existed. We've been dealing with it for how long? How many have I covered? How many? Like how many? Tens of thousands. And maybe 40,000 academics that sold us out, that we've covered. We actually covered their studies. They paid their mortgage payments and their children's dental and the health care for their family, and vacations and toys by cutting your throat for the nuclear industry. By creating studies that said, no, you can send your child here. Yeah, there was a nuclear disaster right here, but we're academics. You can trust us. We have your best interest at heart. And you did, and they didn't. And your loved ones grew up with debilitating illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries that probably forced you to liquidate all your assets just to give them a few more years of comfort. And the nuclear industry is aware. That's why they bought shares in the companies that would proliferate off your misery on top of that. You bring them to the hospital in desperations when they're dying, and the hospital said, we can't help you, but if you signed a piece of paper absolving us of any harm, we can try experimental radiation. How long has it been experimental radiation again? Oh, that's right, about 120 years. And how many cures do you have in it? Well, none, but we'll get there. How many trillions of animals have you killed in the laboratories for your bullshit cures with radiation? You know, we should replace all lab rats with academics because it actually makes sense. You can't be cruel to an academic anymore. And that is the new world order you're living in, that you better get used to, and you better mark it down. They're out to get you, and they're good at it, and they have enormous amount of resources to see it through. And if they don't, the next administration will. If they don't, the next administration will get you. You plague is what they see you as. And their solution is to lie to you about every facet of it. Nuclear industry for 80 years. Every facet of it, every day, every administration, every professor's job is cut your throat in the nuclear industry. And there ain't nobody can tell you a difference if you've been around this site at all. because we provided the documentations for every one of my assertions endless times a day. Well, how do you look your children in the face and say, I didn't try? To those who didn't. I don't know. I can't reconcile that one. I can't reconcile how the world can look anybody in the eyes again after what we've seen here and been through, and the research expeditions we carried out quantifies those assertions a billion times over. I can show you endless documentation. I can bring it. I can bring you 1,000 pieces in the next hour if I want to. And every bit of it would be extremely well articulated, but what's the point? You're going to be looking there instead of right here. What's the point? I sacrifice everything. I sacrifice everything. Gladly, too, in the hopes that we can even have a conversation. How many times have you heard me say we're going to win? You haven't, right? How many times have you heard me say we need to have a conversation? 100,000 times? More? And the only show on the planet describing and providing the documentation day in, day out struggles to get 200 views, struggles to get a few thumbs up, struggles to go out and look for the birds, struggles to keep the operation moving in baby steps. I should have covered the entire province by this point of the summer and documented the species that were here or weren't here. I got no excuses for that. I failed miserably. And I can't sleep at night because of it. And it's not right. Shouldn't the 8 million species have a voice? Shouldn't they deserve a single voice? Apparently not. No voices. Nobody's allowed to have a voice that opposes this bizarre industry known as nuclear. No opposition allowed, period. It'll be censored out of the entire biosphere. They burned over 1,600 of my presentations already in a stroke of a pen. Well, I was out looking for spiders, the crime of the century, apparently. Because they're gone. And normally you would check the spider webs for the insects in the area. When you come to a new area, let's find some spider webs. Not very hard. There's 500,000 per acre. Well, there used to be. Thank God I got pictures of them, because nobody would believe me. There was never no spiders here. There's no spiders in the forest. That's what a teacher said to me 2 years ago. Oh, I didn't know there was spiders in the forest. What do you say? Your students should get their money back. But I had a teacher say that to me. I didn't know there was spiders in the forest. I was a teacher teaching children. You know why he got the job? Because he doesn't know there's spiders in the woods. Perfect. You're hired. The nuclear industry will show our appreciation of you at some point. To claim that the melted reactors that are gone, these are massive buildings, to claim that the fuel pools are still there when they're obviously not there is mind-blowing in endless ways, because there's 100 million academics can come out and tear that apart. Any journalist, investigative journalist, could have tore that apart. That'd be the end of it. I sent the thumbnail picture of this video of the missing reactor 4 and the 4 elite journalists pretending they're in the fuel pools to Greenpeace, over different Greenpeaces, over 100 times, and they blocked me, every one of them. And you know what? If any of them, because they have a reach, if any of them had tweeted out the picture and said, hey, what's going on here? I wouldn't be doing this today because we would have won that battle. If any media organization had showed that picture, we wouldn't be here right now because we would have won the battle. If any university said, wait a second, you guys fake being in reactor 4, what's going on here? The world would have had a conversation anyway. We never even had a conversation. And any conversations that did show up over the last 12 years were controlled opposition. And it's like that literally across the board. But nuclear is special, isn't it? Because there's 1,800 diseases that comes from nuclear. 1,800. Literally, the textbook of medical illnesses is the nuclear industry. Radioactive fallout wipes out all the species. And you better get out there and enjoy the few butterflies you can find. You know, there's no baby ducks here this year. There was the 46 million migratory birds didn't show up. And they didn't show up anywhere else. The official story is, no, they're here. They're nesting. They're raising chicklets. But we went out, we got 16, we managed to get 16 trips. I say managed because the truck barely made it home each time. It was in such bad shape. Summer's gone, basically, now, and that's the end of it. We're still going to do the research. Have the truck back tomorrow. And hopefully we can get some research in before winter sets in, out in the middle of the Atlantic, the best spot on the planet, where the species failed to show up and the world sat in silence and yelled about Trump. No problem starting up accounts to yell about Trump. The media will put him on a pedestal too. So you could do it too. Maybe you can end up on TV too. That's what he done it, see? A small group of us have been steadfast for over a decade, relentless in pursuit of educating you and the population. Not the academics or scientists or engineers or journalists, because they're the first ones to cut your throat every day. Their job is wake up, get out there, cut your throat. They go have cocktail parties, get some awards, rinse and repeat. So in about 2 hours, Japan is officially, allegedly going to start the dumping of the wastewater that they've been dumping nonstop for 12 years. But now you can never have a conversation again. That's the official end of the conversation is in about 2 hours. Not that there's been a conversation, has there? In my Calm Down Charlie t-shirt of a stalker from Japan that stalked me for 10 years straight, relentless, to get me to give this up. And he's not by himself. Must be so proud, eh? They must be so happy. They got nothing to fear, it's just me. There's nobody else calling them out. There's no one showing the documentation, the evidence. It's so simple to show the evidence. Why don't people just show the evidence? I shows it 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, year after year after year after year. I don't need to put it on the screen. If you've never been here, you can go look my last video. There's tons of it and every other video. There's almost 500 on this site. They burnt the 1,600 on my other site because of the crime of looking for spiders. And I don't know what to say to you. I don't know what to say to you. Tonight I'm speechless in the context of I can take you through the lies again today, but I can't do it to you. Today is such an important day. It's the worst day in human history where we stopped having a conversation about the most important topic human will ever understand, or know about, rather. What Fukushima done, the pulse event from Fukushima, was really something. They're calling it climate change, and they're calling it climate change everywhere. No, it's climate change. Yes, 80 years of radioactive fallout, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light, and never goes away. 80 years of just pouring that into the environment from over 450 nuclear plants worldwide. The endless decades of dumping it into the environment, into the oceans, into the estuaries, the rivers, the lakes, the streams, the local landfills, putting it in your smoke detectors and sticking it in your home. The old cameras in the 40s and 50s, their flashes was zirconium, one of the most toxic substances known to man. And so you would break the glass of the little flash, and that would release this huge, deadly plume of zirconium into the areas. And usually these were used around all the celebrities and big parties. They could only afford the cameras. You poison every one of them. And they knew what they were doing, the industry. Remember the radium suppositories? Think about how sadistic that was. How about the radium lipstick that all the children got incredible, their lips would just rot. Or the radium makeup, radium soap, radium toothpaste. And every one of them would eventually get burned, and then they come up with another radium to kill you with. And the whole world sat silent and went out and bought it. The radium jugs, where you would fill up these jugs, were made of uranium clay. And you would wait for 5 or 6 hours, and then you would drink whatever water was there for the next day, radium water, and everybody would die from it, of course. When you look at what they've done to the radium girls, the children, because they had little tiny fingers, right? And they would dip this little paintbrush, little thin, tiny, fine, pen-sized paintbrush, into the uranium bottle, and put a little dot on the watch. So the bombers can drop bombs on other people's children to feed the military-industrial complex, because that's how it works. And the children were instructed after each dot to lick the little thin paintbrush before sticking it back in the bottle to get nice little beautiful spots on the watches, because the bombers really need to see what time it is so they know when to drop their bombs, children. And these children, their jaws would rot off, right, like literally fall apart. It was a horrible way to die. And so when they got sick, the nuclear industry would start up smear campaigns saying they had herpes and syphilis. And a lot of these children were actually virgins. And can you imagine how devastating your daughter would be on her deathbed, dying from working in that factory, and the smear machine was out saying she had sexually transmitted diseases and calling her a slut, especially back in those years, right? Well, any year, obviously, but back then rumors were nasty because you didn't have the propaganda machines in full swing like you do today. They done sex ratio studies after Chernobyl, which is irrelevant compared to Fukushima, but it was a terrible event. And it was so bad, they'd done sex ratio studies on the entire population of Europe, because you knew Europe got pounded with radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. And so you're studying more males than females. And if you get more males, then you can say they were poisoned by Chernobyl. And that's what they saw through the whole country. They've actually done studies on male and female populations, newborns, worldwide after the atmospheric testing, because they knew the world got poisoned severely. And pre-Fukushima, for instance, there was nowhere on the planet you can go where your Geiger counter wasn't screaming anthropogenic man-made radiation energy every second. It poisoned the biosphere permanently by the 40s, the 50s. France set off in a 30-year of nuclear testing because they couldn't work it out. It took them 30 years to every nuclear bomb. They were like, no, we can do better. So they done 30 years of it. But when you do it in kilotons, the French Polynesian islands were exposed to the equivalent of a nuclear Hiroshima-Nagasaki, rather, because it's plutonium, a Nagasaki bomb every week for 12 years. And 10 administrations have reintegrated over the last 70 years. Well, they stopped in the 90s, actually. But every administration has vehemently denied that the French Polynesians had any adverse side effects from being exposed to a Nagasaki bomb every week for 12 years. So think about that kind of disconnect. Generation after generation after generation of administrations had to say, okay, well, we got to cut everybody's throat in the French Polynesian Islands. Anybody here got a problem with that? Everybody like, no, my mom done it, and her daddy done it, and his great-great-grandpappy done it. We'll do it. We're getting an extra few days off a year with pay, right? Did the same thing with the Australians in Montebello. Done the same thing with Christmas Island with the British, of course. The Americans have 1 million square kilometers, and the Marshall Islands is too radioactive to be habitable. 2019, 1 million square kilometers. But no. The footprint is the size of a swimming pool, Dana. But Hanford, you've done 450 billion gallons in the soil is equal to a 518-foot wall, 6 feet thick, of radioactive lethal sludge by the liter, 18 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet. And then some, in just one incident. No, everything can fit in a swimming pool. You tell every kid today, right? You brainwashed every generation now for how many years with Spider-Man and the Hulk, which was created by the nuclear industry to lull them into complacency, and you topped it off with SpongeBob and The Simpsons to make sure they can never escape the propaganda. And it became a hit, artificially, didn't it? And they sold so much merchandise, everybody made so much money off it, it was great. So for the victims and all their loved ones that suffered for the rest of their eternities. And it's a coward industry. It's such a coward industry that I put my telephone number on the screen for the last decade. Not a single nuclear academic has called into the show and challenged a single one of my assertions. Not one. Not one academic, not one professor, not one. There sure was a lot of universities originally got in my comment section and was angry at me, was exposing me because they wouldn't take their money, because they wouldn't take their academics, because they wouldn't take their interviews, because they wouldn't take their equipment, because I didn't want to be labeled a piece of shit, which is what they are. I didn't need them, and I still don't today. I'm better off without them. Because hooking myself up, aligning myself with a university is literally a curse. It's the worst thing a human can do. It's the last possible way you can have any credibility. There's around 15 of them bitching and whining and sniveling in the comments sections all the time. Until I blocked them all and got rid of them eventually. Using the university's website saying, how come Dana won't take my studies? Because he's up to no good. When I was doing research on the ocean, I was vilified, demonized, and smeared every single day when I was on the ocean. I was out there for 4 or 5 months a year. And going out and documenting the species was the crime of 1,000,000 years. You can't even go online and search Dana Durnford without finding the most horrible, unbelievable, monstrous assertions about me. Accuse me of everything conceivable and then some to discredit me. And they did. It worked perfect. Bravo. Wow, you guys are amazing. Destroyed a perfectly good person. And you got a few kickbacks, I bet, or not. It made you happy anyway, I'm sure. How many of you told your children what you really do, I wonder, is the big question. None, right? How many of you told your friends what you really do? None, right? It's the saddest day I can remember in my life. The day when we can no longer have a conversation. I'll keep trying. I employ a lot of pro-nuclear. They got to monitor me and everybody watches my feed. I'll keep working anyway. I got no choice. The world deserves at least one person out there, right? I guess. I'm going to do it just for spite. Not that it makes any difference, obviously. But I'm going to do it for spite. I promise, I swear. I'm not going away. You can be sure of that. But eventually I'm sure I will. And then you've only won, right? I'm humiliated that the world sat in silence today. I searched and searched and searched for just a glimmer of hope that there was somebody else out there saying, wait a second. You know, we'll be back to business again tomorrow night. Everything will be normal. And we'll move on. Day will still be monsters and destroy everything we covet. Maybe one day we'll thank them for it. Never did like the whales. Never did like birds. I'm glad they're gone. Who needs butterflies? And see everybody tomorrow night. That's the last show of the week. I'll cover the show I was going to do tonight. Hugs for everybody.